Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The latest employment numbers from StatsCan are good news from Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall, the darling of Canadian conservatism, and Canada's most popular premier with an enviable approval rating of 64%. Interestingly, these numbers show that Saskatchewan now has the lowest jobless numbers, despite having a corporate tax of 12% and progressive personal income tax to the Premier. Tax fairness, sustainable, predictable funding for vital public services, balanced budgets, and low jobless rates go hand in hand in Saskatchewan. Why not here in Alberta, Premier? Why not, Premier?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the fact that on an annual basis there are over 100,000 people moving to this province because of the competitive economic environment that we have, the social programs that we're able to support, and the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we are planning for the future, that we are investing in hospitals, in schools, and in roads. And, Mr. Speaker, we are the economic engine of this country, as we have heard the Prime Minister and many premiers say over the past 10 months. So, Mr. Speaker, we know that the budget that we have tabled allows us to balance exactly what we need to provide the services that are needed for Albertans that can continue to draw people to this province, and we're proud of that, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, not from Saskatchewan, they're not. Mr. Speaker, the U.S. Congressional Research Service, the equivalent of Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office, did a comprehensive 65-year study which clearly demonstrates that tax cuts don't lead to economic growth. To the Premier, why, other than ideological pig-headedness, do you refuse to make just some small tweaks to our tax system so Alberta can have sustainable funding for seniors' care, K-12, post-secondary, health care, and maybe even some free hospital parking for our veterans? Why, Premier?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we've seen in Alberta is the commitment that this progressive Conservative government has taken to tax policy has allowed for a competitive and a successful economy, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to put that up against the Parliamentary Budget Officer any day, Mr. Speaker. And what I will say is that we have been able in this province, without increasing taxes, Mr. Speaker, and actually keeping spending to zero, which is more than any party in the opposition suggested, we've been able to provide sustainable funding to build infrastructure and to build an economy that continues to attract people to this province every year, Mr.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's time this government have its own parliamentary budget officer to keep them honest. Mr. Speaker, let's have a quick review of the Premier's promises. Stable funding for municipalities, broken. Stable funding for health care, broken. Stable funding for seniors, broken. Stable funding for K-12, broken. Stable funding for post-secondary, broken. Every promise broken because this Premier absolutely refuses to address the province's revenue problem. And Premier, I have to ask you why? Why? Do you care more about pleasing your big corporate donors and clinging to power for your leadership review than doing what's right for Albertans? Why?
You know, Mr. Speaker, simply because the opposition stands up and says something, you know, as I say over and over again, doesn't make it true, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to the sustainable funding for those programs, Mr. Speaker. We have ensured that we are not only committed to sustainable funding, but continuing to build the infrastructure that's going to allow those programs to be delivered in the facilities that they need to be, Mr. Speaker. And that's what long-term growth looks like in a progressive Conservative government. It works, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're on this side of the House.